We started from the bottom, now we're here. So we're gonna start this thing all right.
Welcome to Tip on Top of the Tip. I am Zenitra Perry.
And I am INEZ Chimangariso. Y'all, welcome to the Tip on Top of the Tip. Okay. We have had an amazing couple of weeks since the last time we synced, y'all. If you could tell, I'm tan, I'm brown, honey, I'm brown. We brown, okay? Just spent a week in Belize, like, celebrating my birthday and just connecting. And I feel so full. My heart is so full. So I'm glad to be here.
Yes, it was a good time. I think it actually does flow pretty well into today's topic. So let's just go ahead and start this thing off right.
We're gonna start this thing out right. Okay, with the value of the day. So if you're not familiar, what we do is every tip on top of the tip, we select or randomly select a value that can be applied to both business and a lot of times personal. I've found like a lot of times personal. So yes, what was selected.
Today's value is future generations. Future generations.
So this feels in my spirit very much personal off top because, like, being a mom and a wife and a daughter, like, I'm always thinking about future generations. I did what is it? Is it the DISC? No, I think it was another assessment, and it was talking about how I am like very future focused, so much to the point that I care nothing about the past. Like, I don't want to talk about history. I hate history lessons. Like, I just be like, but what is we doing next? Like, so for me, like, future generations is really like focused around like, what are you doing to make sure that the people that come after you are going to be good, right? Like, that they are going to be uplifted, that they're going to be in some way better than you, right? Like, how are you leaving a mark, leaving a legacy, leaving wealth, leaving emotional intelligence so that the people who come behind you are better than you. And then, like, as I think about that, like, it's a high value, and I don't think about it as much at work. And I think it might be because I am not in management, right? Because I think, future generations really focuses on the people you're bringing up. But if I think about work, one of the things that I do kind of think about is like, how am I doing things or setting a standard that Black women in tech, in software engineering, in, solution architecture, in my company or in other companies can leverage, right, as they make their way up the ladder, right? Now they don't have to be making their way up under me. However, like, some of the things that I do and I go up after, and some of the ways that I present myself or that I assert myself in job roles, I think is important to make room, make space for the next person who's going to want to come in that room. So everybody's not alarmed or surprised that somebody who looks like me or even is as animated as me is in the room or shows up. So what does future generations like mean to you?
So initially, future generations just did not connect. And I was just like, how is this specifically a work value? But whenever I think about it from a legacy perspective, which I know is different from future generations, but I started with legacy, and legacy is really important to me, right? Because I am 100% the team leader. I'm thinking about my legacy as a leader. I'm thinking about kind of what processes and the amount of productivity that I will leave behind. But that is very personal, right? That's really about me more so than it is the future generations. However, when I think back to the beginning of my career, I've always thought about, to your point, like, I wanted to be in a position where people who look like me, who came from similar backgrounds as me, would look to leadership and be like, wow, like, they want me here because I can see a reflection of myself in this space by me being there. So from that perspective, I have had this idea of future generations in mind, and understanding that at least taken on the responsibility of forging a path forward so that it would be easier for them. I think that our trip this weekend makes it make even more, this weekend last week, makes it even make even more sense, because this trip was a generations trip, right? As much as it was a celebration for you to have kind of, you know, your parents and their friends there, you know, alongside of us, and the conversations that we had just kind of got me thinking about the respect for each generation, and how it's so easy to look at the generation that came before you and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did it that way. Like, this is so old and so antiquated. And it's also very easy for, you know, an older generation to look to the next generation and be like, these kids, they lost their way. Like, none of those things were possible. We couldn't do any of it. Like, I don't understand why they even value those things.
Right.
And, you know, one of the conversations we had was just around this idea of having respect and reverence for what each generation is tasked with doing, because one builds on top of the other. Like, you can't have the future generation without the pathways that were forged from the prior generation. So that has me even more excited in thinking about, or just even realizing and accepting that the next generation is going to do things in a completely different way, because the times will be different. Hopefully, you know, my generation will have done some things to make it easier, better, you know, faster, stronger, in order for them to be able to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. So I don't think I can think about future generations without thinking about the prior generations, and like the shoulders that we stand upon, the things that were learned before that we take as second nature, or we take as we are critical of it because we're like, you did this and that's wrong. But we have the freedom to be able to analyze those things because of certain other areas that they have you know, made things easier for us on. So I love music, and I like to look at the evolution of music, and how, you know, in the jazz era, you know, they had no idea that like rhythm and blues would evolve, and, you know, in that, you know, Motown era, they had no idea like what hip hop would come around and do. And so I in my head, I'd be trying to put my finger on, okay, so like, what is going to be the next evolution of music? And, you know, maybe it's another 20, 30, 40 years before we see whatever that next genre is that comes about. But things are constantly changing. And when things are acceptable in the current time, you have to allow space for like the next group to come in and you know, and allow them to have their thing too, and reserve your critique and judgment, because you know, your thing, your parents didn't enjoy, they didn't like it, y'all were crazy. You know, you don't, as much as we try not to become our parents, we end up becoming them. But in this regard, I think there's a way for us to be excited about what new generations or future generations are going to be doing. And that happens in both the professional setting and in the personal setting.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, as you pulled in kind of the things that were happening in Belize, like, it's like, it was such a generational experience. And like, it's funny to see, it's I think in thinking about future generations, I think those types of conversations are important, because sometimes unless you actually have the conversations with them, you don't know what's important to them, right? And in order to advocate and sponsor and make room for them, right, you also kind of have to know what's important to them, right? Like, and so I think at the same time, when we are in our own generation, right, and we're thinking about the things that are important to us, we have to layer those in as well. And like, when we come into places where the conflict, right, where there's a conflicting value, because we're talking about values anyway, where there's a conflicting value, like it's a place of curiosity, right? A place of curiosity instead of judgment. Right? Like, I think that is most important, because to your point, like, everybody is living in a different world. Right? Like, my parents lived in a different world. Their parents lived in a different world. We are living in a different world. And I promise you, these people who was being raised and coming up and graduating during COVID,
different world,
honey, it's a whole different world. Like, so like, I think it's important, like especially when you're engaging with future generations, to really just approach it from a place of curiosity, like, and questions, right? More than judgment and kind of like, suppression. I was listening to some video. What was it? I've been on my conscious parent kick. She was talking about we were talking about emotional regulation for children, right? And how like and this was part of the conversation, our generation is very much into helping our children be responsible, academically excellent, and also emotionally mature, right? And able to manage their emotions. And she gave an amazing analogy, and I was like, oh. So she was talking about how when you are a parent and your student, your child's teacher comes to you and they're struggling in math, they're not doing well, you will garner everything you have and find every resource and jump in and dive in to try to help them get better at math. We got tutors, we staying at the school, we got workbooks in the summer, all the things, right? And so like she was like, that's something that developmentally, right, you're helping them with, because they're at a stage where it's going to be important to them later and they need help developing with it. So, but generationally, especially Black people have never prioritized helping our children develop emotionally, right? There's no jumping in and help. There's all the resources, therapy, coaching. We're going to have these talks. We're going to do this meditate. We have not done that, right? We just expect these little humans to figure it out. Right. And that was one of the things we were talking about. Like we had to figure it out. Y'all got to figure it out. But it's like, wait a minute. Why they got to figure that out? Which is one of the hardest things to figure out. As an adult, we don't even have this figured out, right? And so I feel like one of the things I love about our generation, and I see in future generations, is that we are really about this. No, we're not just going to leave you hanging in the emotional space and help you excel in the achievements. Like we are also going to hold your hand on this journey to understanding your mind and your feelings and your emotions and how they show up and how you can control them in your life and in your journey to all the achievements.
That reminds me of a conversation we had where we wanted to identify that the older generation called themselves the seniors. So we were inevitably the juniors. So the juniors were talking about asking for help from the seniors. And I think it fits into what you just said, because we are so used to helping the babies, the next generation to come along, that we are now learning how to ask for help. And we're going to the seniors for help. And they're like, ain't nobody help me. Like, right. Look at this, you can do that out. And like there is a certain self-assuredness and confidence that we have in our abilities, but at times our asking for help can really be solved with reassurance, because the seniors were saying like, I don't know how to help you. You're doing things that I've never had to do, right? And luckily we were talking to seniors who are great communicators. So they were able to say, I don't know how to help you. And I think that, when we go into a work environment, sometimes it's hard to admit what you don't know, especially, when we're talking about cross-generational work teams. In a way that in this personal space, the seniors were able to say, like, I don't know how to help you, but I believe in you. I will be your cheerleader. I'm rooting for you. You've got this no matter what. And once we had that dialogue with them, we were able to be like, oh, well, like, that's really all I needed to hear. Like, I really came to you for guidance, but now that I understand that you hadn't gone through this situation, so you couldn't provide guidance, that your support and your advocacy and you being a cheerleader is enough. And now I have the task of going off and finding someone who can give me the answers. That happened in a safe space, in a personal environment. But when we think about it from a professional perspective, vulnerability and how it shows up at work, like, what happens if someone on your team comes to you and asks you a question that you really don't know how to process, how to deal with? How are you providing them assurance? Are you redirecting them to someone that can help? Are you getting down in the trenches with them? Are you being honest with them and saying, like, you know what, I've never experienced this before. Right. Like, let's figure this out together. Or are you telling them that like that's not important? Like, we don't need to
Right.
focus on that. We've never had to deal with that before, so it's never come up.
Mhm.
So when we talk about working, cross generation, because as everyone has said, this is the most diverse workforce that there's ever been when it comes to the different generations. And it's funny because as a millennial, I remember when we were entering into the workforce and it was like, oh, the millennials want to do this and the millennials want to do that. And like now, like we are old and we now are the seniors, if you will. And there's a whole new group of people who are coming along. Time happens really quickly. And no matter what stage you entered into the workforce in, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you're going to advance and you're going to be the senior and you're going to have to open your mind to, what it is that this new junior class of employees, the different ways in which they want to work, the different questions that they have, just thinking about, work from home, remote work versus in the office, and how the generations view being in the office differently and the value of being in the office, and how, the younger generation are like, I just want to do my job. Like I don't really have
I don't need to drive to you or see you every day.
I don't need to see you. Like, can tell me what you need me to do? And thinking about the worlds that we live in. I had a conversation with a friend, and she was saying that like her entire life she's been able to text message, and so like having phone conversations just isn't normal to her, right? She's had a cell phone her entire life. She was able to text. And if we think back in the day, we didn't have these anytime minutes, right? We had daytime minutes, and we had to wait to those nighttime, limited nights and weekends kicked in. And if you were in, middle or high school, you had a bedtime. So you had maybe 1 hour after 9 p.m. where you could talk on the phone. So talking on the phone just isn't something that generation values because it wasn't part of their world. And so now we think about, these kids who have had school done remotely, and we think they're going to want to come in the office.
Absolutely not. You might as well forget it.
It's just not going to be a part
like,
of their
they
world.
didn't have to go to school, like, child, please.
Right. And the fact that they have options, right? Like back in, we didn't have options. We had to, but you know what? That's not the day and time that we currently live in.
They do.
And so, yeah, man, thinking about these future generations, like you really have to open your mind to things being different. And I love what you said about curiosity, because judgment, is a lot of time it's our ego. It's our own unwillingness to change and evolve and shape shift. We feel like we've worked hard to get to the place of comfort, and then we get there and these little youngins want to come make us uncomfortable.
Right. Time to be uncomfortable.
Right. Like I was uncomfortable getting to the top. I want to be comfortable now that I'm there. And it's like, no, because things are constantly evolving and changing. So this approaching it from a space of curiosity kind of keeps the communication flowing. And it really allows us to learn from each other and assess kind of what has changed. Like literally, I had this conversation 2 weeks ago about this generation having cell phones their whole life. And I never considered it. Like it never even crossed my mind. His whole life, right? And so having that conversation, really just opened my eyes to a way where I'm like, why you can't just pick up the phone? It's like, well, I've never picked up the phone. So this value of future generations, again, it reminds me of last week's value of adaptability. Like you have to be adaptable and be open to new perspectives and new ways of doing things, whether it's in your personal life or in your professional life.
And speaking of new ways of doing things, okay, we're gonna get into the tip of the day. And the tip of today is, so first of all, like y'all, this tip has a history and I remember nothing and Z remembers everything. So she got to tell the story. However, the tip is cut through the way, right?
Cut through the way.
So what is the story behind cut through the way?
It is hilarious because INEZ remembers like the highlights, like she really is the cliff notes, and she has no idea of the context behind it. And I'm like, girl, no, this was tied to this story. And I'm over here and I love everything. I remember everything, which also ties to what you were saying earlier about you not liking history. I'm like, oh, maybe that's yeah, because I love history. I love seeing how history repeats itself. Yeah. I don't have the memory outside of my lived experiences. People who are like history majors and they can remember dates, like that is not my jam. I can't remember dates. you know, my birthday, if you didn't have a birthday before I left high school, I don't know your birthday. I'm sorry. It's probably in a calendar somewhere to help me out. But I do love history. And so maybe that's why, you know.
I never thought about that till now, but that makes sense.
Yep. So this story is a childhood story, and I laugh at the many ways that we have really developed our own language based off of our experiences, and it has carried us through, you know, 30 plus years of friendship, and we use it in work context, even though this story has nothing to do with work. So walking home from middle school, there was, you know, there's streets, real streets that you can walk down. However, there was a particular boy that I had a nice little crush on. And in order for me to hopefully walk past his house and maybe he would be outside, I'd have to cut through the way. Right. I couldn't take the long way. This was all about, you know, finding the shortcuts to get what I wanted, which was to be like, hey. And so when we were thinking about the tip on top of the tip and how that shows up in everyday life, you know, there are some benefits to cutting through the way. I think there's, you know, I like words. Some people will call it shortcuts, but I like to call it efficiencies. And really being able to identify kind of like what the goal is, what are you working towards, and finding the most efficient way possible to get there. And sometimes that efficiency means taking a deep dive into the process as it is, understanding what it is, and then finding, are there any redundancies? Is there anything that I could do to shorten this timeline, to shorten this process? We can talk about it from a process perspective, right? And so again, we're looking for redundancies. But when we think about from a career trajectory perspective, it's like, there's but so much cutting through the way that you can do. Sometimes you're still going to have to just do the work, right? Like there may be times where it took someone 25 years to get to a particular point, and you may be able to get there in 16, but like, is it really possible that you can get there in 8 or 4 or 2 years? Right. No. But, you know, again, kind of talking about future generations and leaning on the wisdom and the things that the generations before us have learned, you know, my goal is to help future generations do things bigger, faster, stronger, you know. So if there are ways that I can help them cut through the way, right, the things that it took me a long time to learn, if I could just share that information with them to get them to the best parts of themselves faster, then I'm absolutely going to share that. At the same time, my other saying, or one of my sayings, is you have to learn the rules so you can play the game, and then eventually you can break the rules. But you can't come out here creating shortcuts. Right. You don't even know what the rules of the game are. And that's something I think I've seen in the workplace that you know, the different generations struggle with, because sometimes newer generations want to get to efficiencies and cut through the way faster without really understanding kind of what the rules are and learning how to play the game first. But yeah, so for me, cut through the way, you know, it's really about efficiency. And there are times where you can get rid of reduce redundancies, or, you know, any type of waste in your time or in your process. And you can kind of cut through the way and create shortcuts there. But then there'll be times where you really just have to go through the steps, and you're not going to be able to cut through the way or create a shortcut or create efficiencies without learning more information first.
This is very good. This is very good, because as I was thinking about it, like, I love efficiency, and there's a couple of things to me that can happen when you're cutting through the way. Like, in that, when you're presenting efficiency, sometimes it can make people very uncomfortable. Right. And so I am all for cutting through the way, actually. Like, I'm always trying to find the most efficient way, because, honey, I ain't got time. Okay. But you also have to learn the skill of conflict resolution, as well as, like, there's a nuance to helping people deal with the change. Yeah. Right. Because we were just talking about how, like, sometimes certain generations have gotten to comfort, and when you come in trying to cut through the way and change stuff and make efficiencies, they're like, this is how we always did this. Right. And sometimes there's I don't want to say jealousy, I don't know what the word is, but it's something to the effect of like feeling something in their pride about the fact that they didn't think about this. Right? Like I've been here longer. I'm over you. I've been doing this for years. And I feel like I should have brought this idea to the table. And so now, I have a resistance to it, not because it's not a good idea, but because it threatens my authority and my seniorhood and my leadership, right? So these are some of the things that you need to consider when you cut through the way. The other thing is like, you also have to consider, speaking of like generations who don't learn the rules. Now, the thing is, the benefit of learning the rules to me is that you have considered all points of failure in this new method, right? If you don't know the rules, then you haven't fully like analyzed and thought through, right? What are all the things that could go wrong? So if you cut through the way, right? Like, and you going from school, cross the boo house to your house, right? You want to make sure that you know who all houses is through the way that could potentially see you.
Woo,
Might know some grown-ups that you are directly tied to, right? Like, these are the things you have to know. Okay, so you might have to take the streets first, so you know who houses is over there, right? Like, so make sure that you do that as well, because efficiency is great, but it's only great if you thought through all of the failure points. But I am about this, they talk about, there's like a saying like, don't remake the wheel. I'm like, honey, remake it, honey, remake it. because because if it's gonna make this car go faster, honey, let's do that. I'm here for it. Okay.
But to your point, right? Like you have to know all of the parts of the wheel that are required. You can't just be out here like, you know what? I think square wheels will be real good.
Right.
Because it's futuristic and like that's the direction we're going in. And it's like, well, it's round for a reason, girl. Understand? Right. You got to know the rules so that you can play the game. And I love what you said around efficiencies and managing people's comfortability with change. Most people are not comfortable with change, right? We're generally trying to create a certain set of systems with specific outcomes so that life is predictable, as if life is predictable, because it's truly not, right? But as I say, the only thing consistent is change. Like one thing that's going to happen in life is change. However, whether it's society or, media has told us like, this is what a successful life looks like. And so you try to create those things so that you can have the comfort, you can have the ease. And I think that, that shift has to move around, it has to be around kind of your response to things and not the thing itself that makes you comfortable, right? So it can't be this process that makes you comfortable, but it's like, we know that, this process allows us to be flexible and to meet the needs of the customer. Right. So then if we make any changes, that process still needs to meet the needs of the comfort. And that's where I have to have my comfort and kind of my own sanity around knowing that the objective is being met and not being so tied to the process as is. And that's hard.
It is, honey.
It's hard because when we're at work, like, most of us, we're giving our all, like we're creating things, we're using our brains and our hands and our skill sets and our interests to create things. And at that time, it is the best version that we have based off of the information that we have. And when it's done well, you want to place that thing up on a shelf so that you can look at it. But it's like, no, we got to pull that down because now we need to change it. And you're like, wait a minute, I wasn't done looking at it yet.
Right.
That's my baby. That's the thing that I made. But you really have to be open to recreating things, whether it's a wheel, a process, and even a product at the end of the day, and kind of letting go of that attachment that we have to an idea that we had in the past that manifested itself in like, in this type of work.
I was just thinking about, because you were talking about like knowing the rules before you break the rules. And I had a situation literally just recently at work where sometimes, and this is also comes into play with regard to your tenure, right, at work. So especially when you come in a leadership role, right? So sometimes when you come in a leadership role and you are used to being able to cut through the way to get stuff done, right? So there's processes and teams in place in your new organization that are required to get things done. And you're used to having relationships that kind of allow you to cut through the way here and there. Like, but it's important when you insert yourself into a new organization that you don't create friction with the teams who you will need later on by trying to overtly go around them, right? Right, because you're trying to cut through the way, right? You like, honey, I feel like I could just get this done fast if I can go to the tip top, right? And then the person at the top, like, but did you talk to the people under me? Because clearly they are in charge of this. Like, why are you bringing this directly to me, right? And so it can cause confusion, it can cause conflict, and it can cause more inefficiency than efficiency, right? And so I think that, sometimes it's important, every time it's important for you to know the rules, but also be okay with like leaning into them, especially when you're new to a workforce, because it can make or break the foundation of your relationships when you get, when you're first building them there, right? So like basically it's like, don't come in with your cowboy hat, like I'm about to just ride off over here. Forget y'all, like I'm going over here, like no, I'm gonna need you to walk, okay? Gonna walk through this town, gonna meet these people before you get to the sheriff, so that you can, have these relationships, because you're gonna need these people later on.
And I can think about it from the opposite perspective too, of, being a tenured member of a team and having new team members and you feeling like, well, I know all the shortcuts, let me just do it. And how that's a disservice to your team, right? Because, they may not have the relationships, they may not understand the back end rules of the process, and you cutting through the way without explaining to the team, like, this is why we're able to do this. And it's not solely based off of relationships, because this process is in place, and it will, continuously, make sure that X, Y, and Z goals are being met. But we also need to make sure the X, Y, and Z goals are being met, because someone may come in and just watch what you do and not realize that you're doing a shortcut, and that you have maybe systems, relationships in place to make sure that the other things keep going. And they try to follow your shortcut, not realizing it's a shortcut, and then it messes things up. Right. So as a leader, you may know shortcuts, but you need to make sure that your team understands what the full process is. It enables you to take those shortcuts and then give them space to be able to modify or even kind of create their own cut throughs.
I like it. So I want to know, like, as y'all are watching this, and make sure that you share this with somebody, who you think needs it or who will find it valuable. Like, but as you're watching this, I would like you to like leave a comment and say, like, when do you think it's okay to cut through the way? Right? Like, when is it okay to cut through the way? And versus like following the process to a T, or really leaning into the processes that have been previously built in your organization, or even in your life, because we about this work-life balance, this professional and this personal life just merging right together.
That's right. That's right. So yes, leave us a comment. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you again.